All right, okay.
How did it begin?
Well, I've been interested in kids who grew up in new religious movements, cults, sects, depending on where you're coming from. And I did a series of articles for the San Francisco Chronicle called Children of Another God, which looked at kids who were born and raised in the Moonies, the Hare Krishnas, Church of Scientology, and this evangelical Christian group called the Children of God. And that led to my previous book, which wound up being called Following Our Bliss, which kind of expanded into a look at the spiritual legacy of the counterculture of the 60s, because a lot of these groups came out of the counterculture in the 60s, right? And so I'd already had done that research and had those kind of connections and contacts. And then in January of 2005, there was a very sensational news story that broke, a murder-suicide involving a kid who was born to be the new prophet in this group called the Children of God, now known as the Family International. And he released a videotape, a 45-minute tape, before he went on this pilgrimage of revenge against the group that he'd left. And just seeing this kid and all the anger and the hatred in someone who was born into this Christian group that preached unconditional love and compassion, just to really try to get to the bottom of what happened with this kid. So I started looking into the situation where these children were growing up all around the world in the 70s and 80s, and found some very frightening stories to kind of explain what happened with this guy.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. Can you give us a quick anecdote or two of, by and large, how the kids turned out?
Yeah, well, this group was very strange in that they started out as basically your typical kind of conservative evangelical group. They had an apocalyptic orientation, which a lot of Christians do now. You know, the end is near, repent. The world is getting corrupt. Satan's working in the world. Jesus is about to come back. But that's a very, very strong stream in evangelical Christianity now. And this group came out of something that was called the Jesus movement, or the Jesus people, which were hippies, druggies, counterculture types in the 60s who found Jesus, and basically kept a lot of the cultural trappings, like they still dressed like hippies and looked pretty wild, but they became evangelical Christians and started proselytizing like evangelical Christians do, evangelizing. So this particular group was a big part of that, but they were going with this prophet named David Berg. They called him Moses, or Mo Berg. And he wound up combining Christian teaching with kind of a free love philosophy, saying that Jesus said love is the greatest commandment, and it was also the height of the sexual revolution. So it was this very strange combination of kind of conservative evangelicals and this free love atmosphere. And he started sending out young women as missionaries, called it flirty fishing, where they would basically seduce men in bars and elsewhere to get them to convert to Christianity, and also, of course, to this particular cult, right? And the women would say that my love is God's love, and this is how could you not love God? God is showing himself through me. And they would actually have sex with these potential converts, and
that was pretty effective, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. Except the guys didn't stay around that long, and the women were not allowed to use birth control because that was immoral. So all these babies were born from these liaisons, and they called them Jesus babies. They had no idea who the father was. It wasn't hard to find women with 5 or 10 kids in this group. So, yeah. So those babies, plus others born in a slightly more conventional manner, not with strangers, but with people in the group. There are 13,000 babies were born from the 30 years leading up to 2001. 13,000. And this is a story about one guy who was really raised to be the child prophet. And there was a lot of sexual abuse going on. A lot of the parents didn't really think they were abusing their kids. They were trying to be free and liberated, and the kids could be around when they were having sex, and there would be a lot of touching. But of course, it created a situation where you have a child molester or a serial predator. It was perfect. So they got enough of those guys to really kind of so it got pretty scary. And then there were teenagers who would start rebelling against this. That's all they knew, so it seemed normal, right? Which is kind of one of the things about child abuse. The children don't know this is wrong or different, but eventually they realize it is. And so a lot of these kids left and had trouble, establishing themselves in the real world. And so it's quite a story. It's quite a tale.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's stranger than fiction, as they say.
Absolutely. And this Flirty fishing. I'm making
Flirty
a note
fishing.
of
Well, yeah,
that
Jesus
for my
said,
own
"Be
self.
out and go be fishers of men." That's where it comes from. That Jesus said, "Be fishers of men," and they were. You know?
Right, so I'm backed by the Lord. I've got that going
Yeah,
for me.
yeah.
That's great. So, wow, absolutely fascinating. But you covered religion
Yeah,
for the Chronicle.
yeah.
How, of all the things to write about, how did you gravitate toward the religion beat?
Yeah, well, I covered other subjects in the past, but I only intended to do this for a couple of years. I had a history of lasting a couple of years on a beat, and you get tired of it, and then go into something else. But well, it was in the late '70s and early '80s that I really started getting interested in religion as a journalist. I wasn't a religious person; I didn't have any seminary training or anything. But actually, it was People's Temple. Remember the People's Temple tragedy, Jim Jones, where hundreds of people died in a mass murder-suicide in the South American jungle, which was a horrifying story. And a photographer I knew at the Examiner, Greg Robinson, was killed, one of the reporters killed right before the massacre. And I did some of those stories about Jonestown and Jim Jones and People's Temple. And just trying to figure out how something like that could happen. I mean, these mothers squirted poison down the throats of their own babies and then killed themselves in the name of God, right?
With everything that you're dealing with in Jesus Freaks, what kind of response have you been getting? Have you been getting any responses that surprised you?
Yeah, well, the book is just out in 2 days, so I haven't gotten that many responses. But from people who read The Galleys, people are, well, they're really impressed with it, which is great. They're calling it it reads like a suspense novel, which is what I was trying to do. But it's a dark story, and some people say they had to stop reading it because it was just so heavy. What these kids went through, it's just so unbelievable. And some women said they had nightmares after reading it, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, you're having an impact, right? It's interesting to see people's reaction. I'm just starting to hear, but it's been positive so far. Well, as you know, journalism is just in disarray now. And everyone's waiting for the next new thing. And it's not just the technology of, is it the internet, or is it television, or is it television on the internet? It's really how you tell stories. And the old people are not really buying that old, this is Dan Rather telling you how the world is like this, and this supposed objectivity. I mean, so people are putting themselves more in their reporting and writing, and that's good in some. I have mixed feelings about it, actually, but. And of course, where the people are getting the jobs, I would tell people, if you're in journalism, you have to learn web design, as well as journalism, and that's an obvious thing, but I've taught at the journalism school at Berkeley, and the kids that are getting jobs, including jobs like for the New York Times right out of journalism school, are the ones who have the web skills, have the journalism skills, but also have the web skills, who can help the paper make this leap to the new technology. I mean, it's so easy to get a job if you know that.